The Council ridiculed humanity, then Earth set them ablaze. Part 1. The great chamber of the Galactic Concord hung in the silent dark of space, wrapped around the blue-green curve of a distant planet like a silver crown. Inside, under arches of polished alloy and glowing crystal, delegates from over 200 species sat in tiered circles, their forms as varied as the stars they came from. Some floated in nutrient-filled globes, others perched on mechanical limbs, and a few simply shimmered in place, their thoughts broadcast as pulses of light. At the center of it all stood Paul Dawson, alone on a small platform wearing a plain gray suit and holding a data slate that felt heavier than it should. He was the only human in the room, and he knew it. Paul had spent 6 months traveling to Viridia Prime, the Concord's neutral meeting station, to present Earth's formal request for full membership. For decades, humanity had been an observer, allowed to watch, to listen, but never to vote, never to shape the laws that now governed half the galaxy. Earth had rebuilt after its own wars, cleaned its poisoned skies, unified its fractured nations, and even helped rescue 3 stranded alien freighters near the Kuiper Belt. Paul believed they had earned a seat at the table. But as he looked up at the sea of alien eyes, some blinking, some unblazing, some not eyes at all, he felt the weight of centuries of human mistakes pressing down on him. The presiding delegate was Zenthari, a tall, feathered being from the Xylos reach. Their voice was sharp, like wind through dry reeds, and they spoke without looking at Paul. "The petition from Sol 3, Zenthari announced, has been reviewed by the Ethics and Advancement Committee. The consensus is unfavorable." A ripple of murmurs passed through the chamber. Paul kept his face calm, but his fingers tightened around the slate. "Humanity," Zenthari continued, turning now with a slow, deliberate motion, "has shown remarkable speed in climbing from planetary chaos to interstellar travel. But speed does not equal wisdom. Your species spent millennia warring over lines on maps, burning your own forests, poisoning your oceans, and splitting your people by skin, tongue, and belief. You only stopped when you nearly erased yourselves." Paul opened his mouth to speak, but a gelatinous Clorvian delegate from the 3rd tier bubbled out a laugh that sounded like water draining from a sink. "They call it history," the Clorvian gurgled. "We call it a warning label." More laughter followed. Not loud, not cruel in the human sense, but dismissive, like adults chuckling at a child who thinks they can fly. Paul felt his cheeks grow warm, but he did not look down. He had trained for this. He had rehearsed every argument, every statistic, every appeal to shared values. But none of it mattered now. The verdict had already been written. Zenthari raised a long, clawed hand for silence. "The Concord acknowledges Earth's recent stability and technological progress. However, emotional volatility remains a critical flaw. Your art is loud. Your music is chaotic. Your leaders change every few years, often reversing course without logic. You weep at stories. You fight over ideas. You love too quickly and hate too deeply. Such instability is incompatible with the careful balance of galactic governance." Paul finally spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "We've changed. We're still learning, yes, but we've built schools on Mars, shared clean energy with Venusian outposts, and opened our archives to any species that asks. We don't claim perfection, but we offer partnership." A reptilian delegate from the Varn cluster hissed softly. "Partnership requires trust. Can you be trusted not to turn your fusion torches on your neighbors when you feel slighted? Your own records show you once pointed nuclear weapons at your own cities." "That was 200 years ago," Paul said. "And your species is only 8,000 years old," Zenthari replied. "In galactic terms, you are infants playing with fire." The chamber fell still. Paul knew what came next. He had read the Concord's protocols. When a petition was denied, the petitioner was given one final moment to respond before being escorted out. He took a breath. "We came here not to beg," he said, "but to show that we belong. You see our past and call it weakness. We see it and call it proof we can grow. If you deny us a voice today, you won't silence us forever. You'll just make us louder." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Zenthari gave a slow blink, their version of a shrug. "Observer status is confirmed. Do not return with another petition for 50 cycles. And Paul Dawson, try to behave." The laughter returned, softer this time, but sharper. It followed Paul as he stepped down from the platform, as the chrome-plated attendants guided him through the arched exit, and as the great doors sealed behind him with a sigh of pressurized air. In the corridor alone, he leaned against the cool wall and closed his eyes. He hadn't cried since he was a boy, but his throat burned. Back on his shuttle, orbiting Viridia Prime, Paul watched the station through the viewport. It glittered like a jewel, full of beings who had never known hunger, never rebuilt a city from rubble, never held a dying friend in a trench. They called humanity unstable. But maybe instability was just another word for hope, the kind that refused to stay buried. As the shuttle turned toward the jump point that would take him home, a message blinked on his console. It was from Earth Command, coded and urgent. He opened it. Just 3 words. They laughed. Good. Paul frowned, then smiled faintly. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he recognized the tone. It was the same tone his grandfather used when someone doubted he could fix a broken engine. It wasn't anger. It was promise. The shuttle leapt into warp, leaving the Concorde's laughter behind. Far below on the blue-green world spinning in the void, billions of humans went about their days, working, teaching, building, dreaming. They didn't know they'd just been called fireless. But soon, they would show the galaxy what happens when you mock a species that learned to make fire in the dark. The Council ridiculed humanity, then Earth set them ablaze part. 2 Paul Dawson's shuttle touched down in the rain-slicked landing bay of Geneva Orbital, Earth's primary diplomatic hub. The sky outside was gray, heavy with clouds that rolled in from the Alps like old ghosts. No one greeted him with fanfare. No cameras flashed. But as he stepped onto the platform, he saw them. Dozens of faces pressed against the observation windows above, silent, watching. They had seen the broadcast. They had heard the laughter. Back on Earth, the news spread faster than any storm. In cities from Nairobi to Vancouver, in underground labs and orbital farms, in quiet homes and crowded classrooms, people paused. They replayed the clip of Xanthari's dismissal, the Clorvian's gurgle, the slow blink that meant, "You are nothing." At first there was shame. Then came the quiet kind of anger, the kind that doesn't shout, but sharpens tools. In a research dome buried beneath the Arizona desert, Lena Ruiz wiped sweat from her brow and stared at the hologram of the Concorde chamber frozen on her wall screen. She had spent 12 years perfecting quantum resonance shielding, a field that could bend energy, not block it, making ships nearly invisible to sensors and immune to plasma fire. The United Earth Coalition had shelved her project, calling it too aggressive for peaceful times. Now she reopened the files. Her fingers flew across the console, pulling up schematics, running simulations, adjusting frequencies. She didn't do it for revenge. She did it because someone had called her people weak, and she knew better. Not far away in a high-altitude lab floating above the Pacific, Owen Grant watched the same broadcast while sipping black coffee. His specialty was stellar dynamics, how stars lived, burned, and died. For years he'd worked on a theory that a focused harmonic pulse could trigger a controlled microflare on the surface of a star, bright enough to be seen across light years, but harmless to planets. The military had labeled it a fireworks display with a PhD. Now Owen pulled up his old notes. He typed a single line into the system. If they think we're fireless, let's give them light. Across the globe, others moved in silence. Shipwrights in the lunar shipyards powered up dormant forges. Programmers in Reykjavik rewrote navigation codes to bypass known Concorde tracking grids. Teachers in Jakarta told their students, "Today we learn why dignity matters." Farmers in Iowa shared power cells with neighbors to keep local comms running. No one declared war. No one shouted slogans. But a new current ran through humanity. A quiet understanding that respect could not be asked for. It had to be shown. Paul was summoned to the Unity Chamber beneath Geneva, where Earth's leaders met in person for the first time in 3 years. The room was plain, wood tables, soft lighting, no flags. Only faces, tired, determined, familiar. The prime coordinator, a woman named Mara Lynn, stood as Paul entered. She didn't offer condolences. She handed him a tablet. "Project Ember," she said. "We've had it ready in pieces for a decade. Never activated, never funded, but now it's time." Paul read the summary. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't an invasion. It was a demonstration. Precise, non-lethal, undeniable. A way to say, "We are here. We see you. And we are not what you think." "Who's leading it?" Paul asked. "We all are," Mara replied. "But you'll speak for us again. when the time comes. In the weeks that followed, Earth changed, not in ways outsiders would notice at first. Trade routes shifted slightly. Power grids synced to new frequencies. Civilian satellites performed routine maintenance that just happened to align with old military relay points. On Mars, the terraforming teams paused their work and began reinforcing underground hangars. On Titan, methane harvesters were quietly retrofitted with stealth coatings. Lena Ruiz traveled to the moon, where she met Captain Daniel Moss, a pilot with calm eyes and a voice like gravel. He had flown rescue missions in the asteroid belt, and once landed a crippled freighter with 3 engines out. Now he stood in a hangar the size of a city block, staring at a ship unlike any he'd seen. Sleek, dark, shaped like a blade turned on its side. No guns, no missiles. Just smooth hull plating and strange emitters along the wings. "This is the Horizon," Lena said. "It runs on a fusion core tuned to your heartbeat, literally. The ship syncs with your biorhythm. If you panic, it stabilizes you. If you focus, it moves faster." Daniel ran a hand along the hull. "What's it for?" "To show them we don't need to destroy to be heard." Meanwhile, Owen Grant finalized his calculations. He found a dead zone near Viridia Prime, a patch of empty space far from planets, asteroids, or trade lanes. Perfect for a light show. He programmed the pulse sequence into a small device no bigger than a book. It would ride aboard the Horizon. One press of a button and a star nearby would flare. Not explode, just brighten like a match struck in a dark room. Back on Earth, schools held special assemblies. Not about war, but about why humans build. Children drew pictures of stars, of ships, of hands reaching across space. News channels stopped airing entertainment and played documentaries about Earth's recovery. The rivers cleaned, the forests regrown. The wars ended not by victory, but by choice. The message was simple: we were broken once. We fixed ourselves. Now watch what we can do. Paul spent his days in quiet meetings drafting the words he would say when the moment came. He didn't write threats. He wrote truths. "You called us fireless," he practiced in his room at night. "So we brought the sun." It sounded strange at first. Then it sounded right. No one leaked the plan. Not because of fear, but because everyone understood. This wasn't about pride. It was about presence. The Concord had laughed because they thought humanity was still crawling in the mud. They didn't know Earth had already learned to walk among the stars, and now it was ready to speak. In hidden shipyards on the far side of the moon, the first vessels powered up. Their names were simple: Harriet Armstrong Chavez Lou Okoye. No grand titles. Just reminders of those who had lifted humanity before. Engines hummed to life, not with a roar but a whisper. Navigation systems locked onto coordinates light years away. Crews boarded in silence, wearing plain uniforms with no insignia. Daniel Moss stood on the bridge of the Horizon, watching Earth shrink in the viewport. He thought of his daughter who had asked him that morning, "Will they see us now, Dad?" He hadn't answered, but as the ship slipped into the dark, he knew the answer was coming. Far below, on the surface of the planet, billions of humans looked up at the night sky, not with fear, but with quiet hope. They didn't know the details of Project Ember, but they knew this: their species had been mocked, and now they would answer, not with fists but with fire they had tamed, light they had earned, and a voice they would no longer hide. The Council ridiculed humanity. Then Earth set them ablaze apart. The moon's far side had always been quiet, a place of dust and silence, craters holding shadows older than cities. But now, deep inside those shadows, something stirred. Beneath layers of regolith and reinforced alloy, hangar doors slid open without sound. From them emerged ships, sleek, dark, and smooth as river stones. They carried no markings, no flags, no weapons visible to the eye. Their hulls drank the starlight instead of reflecting it. These were not warships. They were messengers. Captain Daniel Moss stood on the bridge of the Horizon, hands resting lightly on the command console. Around him, his crew moved with calm purpose. No shouting, no panic. Just the soft hum of life support and the occasional beep of a system check. Outside the viewport, Earth was a blue crescent, half in shadow, half in sun. He thought of his daughter's face, the way she'd hugged him before he left. "Make them see us," she'd whispered. He hadn't promised, but he intended to. The fleet gathered in silence. Not in formation, not in parade, but in a loose cloud, like birds before migration. There were 37 vessels in all, each named for someone who had once stood alone and changed the world. The Armstrong, the Harriet, the Liu, the Okoye. They drifted together, engines idling, waiting for the signal. No radio chatter passed between them. Communication happened through tight beam pulses unreadable to outside scanners. Earth had learned long ago that silence could be louder than noise. Lena Ruiz sat in the Horizon's engineering bay, watching the quantum resonance field stabilize around the ship. Her invention, once deemed too bold, now wrapped them in a cloak of distorted energy. To any sensor outside, the Horizon would appear as a glitch, a flicker, a shadow, then nothing. The same field protected them from plasma bursts, solar flares, even the Concord's own defense grids. She didn't feel pride. She felt responsibility. This wasn't about showing off. It was about making sure no one got hurt, not even those who had laughed. On Mars, in a command bunker carved into Olympus Mons, Owen Grant monitored the final checks. His device, the Stellar Ignition Module, was secure in the Horizon's cargo hold. It looked like a metal box with dials, but inside it held the math of stars. One pulse, perfectly timed, would coax a nearby dwarf star into a brief, brilliant flare. Harmless, visible, unmistakable. He had run the simulation 1,000 times. Every outcome was clean. No radiation, no debris, just light. Back on Earth, cities dimmed their lights at night, not out of fear, but as a gesture. Let the stars be seen, people said. Let them know we're watching too. Children stayed up late, peering through telescopes, though they wouldn't see the fleet. It was already gone, slipping past Jupiter's orbit, heading for the edge of known space. Parents told stories of explorers, inventors, healers, not warriors, never warriors. This mission wasn't about fighting. It was about being seen. The jump to Viridia space would take 3 days at maximum warp. During that time, the crew rested, trained, and checked systems again and again. Daniel walked the decks, speaking softly to each member. He didn't give speeches. He asked how they slept, if they'd eaten, if they remembered why they were here. One young pilot, a woman named Jess from New Orleans, told him she'd joined because her grandmother had lived through the last Great War. She said peace isn't given, Jess said. It's claimed by those who refuse to be small. Daniel nodded. That was enough. The Concorde suspected nothing. Their long-range sensors scanned the usual routes, trade lanes, patrol zones, diplomatic corridors. But Earth's fleet took none of those. They traveled through dead zones, gravitational eddies, and the cold void between star systems where no one bothered to look. They moved like thoughts, not ships. Even their heat signatures were bent inward by Lena's field, leaving no trail. On the second day of travel, Daniel received a message from Earth Command. Encrypted one line, "They still laugh." He showed it to no one, but he kept it in his pocket, folded small like a stone. By the third day, Viridia Prime appeared on the long-range scope, a glittering ring around a peaceful world, bustling with traffic. Freighters, diplomats, pleasure yachts drifted in and out like bees around a hive. The Concorde felt safe, untouchable. They had never been challenged. Why would they be? The human fleet slowed as it neared the system's edge. Engines powered down to near silence. They coasted now, using gravity assists from dead moons and asteroid belts to close the distance without a trace. Daniel gave the order, final alignment. Each ship adjusted its course by microns, syncing to a shared timeline. In 12 hours, they would be in position. Lena ran one last diagnostic. The resonance field held. Owen confirmed the ignition module was armed but not active. All systems green. No mistakes, no second chances. That night, or what passed for night in the endless dark, Daniel stood alone on the observation deck. He thought of Paul Dawson, standing small and alone in that grand chamber, facing laughter like rain. He thought of the billions on Earth who had trusted this moment to a few dozen souls in the void. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. The fleet drifted closer. Viridia Prime grew larger, its lights like scattered diamonds. Inside, delegates argued over trade tariffs and mining rights, unaware that the fire they had mocked was already at their door. They did not see the dark shapes gathering in the blind spots of their sensors. They did not hear the quiet breath of humanity holding itself steady. And then, with no fanfare, no warning, the human fleet arrived. Not with weapons raised, not with threats broadcast. They simply appeared, silent, precise, surrounding the station like a thought made real. The Horizon took the lead, gliding to a stop just beyond the main docking ring. Daniel placed his hand on the comm panel. "Paul," he said softly, though Paul was light years away. "It's time." Outside, the stars watched. And for the first time in centuries, the Conquered was not the only one speaking. The Council ridiculed humanity, then Earth set them ablaze part. For inside Viridia Prime, the air smelled of ozone and polished stone. Delegates from 200 species filled the great chamber once more, their voices rising in the usual hum of debate. Today's topic was the annexation of the neutral Helios belt, a resource-rich zone claimed by no one, and therefore, in the Conquered's view, fair game for the strongest. Zenthari presided again, feathers neatly groomed, voice calm with the certainty of unchallenged power. No one noticed the lights flicker. No one heard the faint hum that slipped past their shields. They were too busy dividing what they believed was theirs to take. Outside, the human fleet held position, silent, still. The horizon floated just beyond the station's outer ring, its dark hull blending with the void. Daniel Moss watched the activity on the station through magnified optics. He saw shuttle traffic, service drones, even a group of young delegates on a tour pointing at the stars with wonder. He did not want to frighten them. He only wanted them to see. Lena Ruiz stood beside him on the bridge, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her console. "Resonance field is stable," she said quietly. "We can pulse the station's main grid without frying life support. Just enough to shut down comms, weapons, and artificial gravity for 90 seconds. Long enough to get their attention." Daniel nodded. "Do it." She tapped a sequence into the panel. There was no explosion, no flash, just a low thrum that passed through space like a heartbeat. On Viridia Prime, every light went out. The soft glow of the chamber vanished. The floating platforms dropped a few inches before emergency systems kicked in. Alarms blared, short, confused bursts. Delegates cried out in a dozen languages. Zenthari spun around, feathers flaring in alarm. "What is this?" they demanded, voice sharp with panic. Before anyone could answer, the viewports lit up, not with fire, not with weapons fire, but with pure golden light. Far off in the empty dark, near a quiet red dwarf star that no one had ever cared about, a flare bloomed. It was small by stellar standards, but bright enough to drown out the stars behind it. A perfect sphere of white gold fire, silent and beautiful, hanging in the black like a second sun. Gasps filled the chamber. Some delegates shielded their eyes. Others stared in awe. The Clorvian delegate bubbled in confusion. That star? It was dormant. How? Then Paul Dawson's voice came through every speaker on the station, calm and clear as if he were standing in the room. "You called us fireless, so we brought the sun." Silence followed. Heavy, real. Even Zenthari did not speak. On the horizon, Daniel watched the station through the viewport. He saw faces pressed against the glass now, looking out at the flare, then at the dark shapes of the human ships. No weapons were raised. No threats were made. The fleet simply waited. Paul's voice continued, broadcast from Earth but routed through the horizon's comm array. "We did not come to fight. We did not come to take. We came to show you what you refused to see. Humanity is not perfect, but we learn, we build. We choose peace even when it's hard. And when you laughed at us, we did not break. We prepared." Inside the chamber, a young reptilian delegate from the Varn cluster turned to Zenthari. "Are they attacking?" Zenthari stared at the flare, then at the dark ships. "No," they whispered. "They are teaching." The lights on Viridia Prime flickered back on. Artificial gravity stabilized, but the comms stayed down. The station was blind to the outside galaxy, cut off for just long enough to feel small. In that moment, the Conquered understood. Humanity could have destroyed them. They could have fried every circuit, melted every hull plate, turned the station into scrap. But they chose not to. They chose light instead of fire, silence instead of screams. On the horizon, Owen Grant exhaled. His flare would burn for another 7 minutes before fading. It was already being recorded by every observatory in the sector. The image would spread faster than any warship. And it carried a message no one could ignore. Earth could touch the stars and still choose not to burn. Daniel stepped to the main comm. "This is Captain Daniel Moss of the United Earthship Horizon. We request a dialogue, not as beggars, not as threats, as equals." No one answered at first. Then slowly a single channel opened. It was the Varn delegate. How How did you get here without our sensors seeing you? Lena's voice came over the comm, calm and clear. You looked for engines, heat, radio waves. You did not look for silence. Another pause. Then the Chlorvian delegate spoke, their usual mockery gone. Your flare. It harmed nothing? Nothing, Owen replied. It was a greeting, not a warning. Xanthari finally stepped forward, approaching the main viewport. They looked not at the flare, but at the horizon. Why now? They asked. Because respect is not given, Daniel said. It is earned, and sometimes it must be shown. On Earth, billions watched the live feed from hidden relay satellites. They saw the flare. They heard Paul's voice. They saw their ships, small, dark, unafraid, holding their place among giants. In homes, schools, factories, people stood a little taller. They had not struck a blow. They had offered a mirror, and the galaxy was finally looking. Back on Viridia Prime, the delegates did not return to their seats. They stayed by the viewports, watching the human fleet, watching the dying light of the flare. No one laughed. No one spoke of annexation. For the first time in centuries, the Concord was quiet, not from order, but from wonder. And in that quiet, something new began. Not war, not submission, but the first real chance for understanding. The fire humanity brought was not meant to burn. It was meant to illuminate. And in its light, even the proudest beings in the galaxy saw something they had missed. A species that had risen from its own ashes, not to conquer, but to connect. The Council ridiculed humanity, then Earth set them. Ablaze Part 5. The silence on Viridia Prime lasted longer than anyone expected. Delegates stood by the viewports, watching the human ships drift in perfect stillness. The flare had faded, but its memory hung in the air like smoke after a candle is blown out. No one moved to restore full station functions. No alarms blared. The Concord, for the first time in its long history, was waiting, not giving orders, not making demands, but simply waiting to see what came next. Xanthari was the first to act. They turned from the glass and walked slowly to the center of the chamber. Their feathers, once stiff with pride, now drooped slightly, as if weighed down by thought. Open a secure channel, they said to their aide. Not to command. To listen. Within the hour, a small shuttle detached from Viridia Prime and glided toward the horizon. It carried no weapons, no escorts, just two delegates, Xanthari and the young Varn representative who had asked the first honest question. When they boarded the human ship, they were met not with guards or scanners, but with Daniel Moss and Lena Ruiz, standing in a clean, well-lit corridor with cups of hot tea in their hands. Welcome, Daniel said. We have much to talk about. The meeting lasted 3 days, not in a grand hall, but in the Horizon's modest conference room, with star charts on the walls and real coffee brewing in the corner. Owen Grant joined them on the second day, explaining how the flare worked, showing simulations, even offering the raw data for their scientists to review. Lena demonstrated the resonance field on a small scale, bending a laser beam around a cup without touching it. The Chlorvian delegate, who had laughed the loudest, watched with wide, glistening eyes. You could have hidden weapons inside that field, they said quietly. You could have struck without warning. We could have, Lena replied. But we didn't. That simple truth changed everything. The Concord had always assumed power meant force. Humanity showed them that true strength could be gentle, precise, and chosen. Back on Earth, the mood was calm but hopeful. No celebrations, no parades. People went to work, tended gardens, taught classes. But there was a new lightness in their steps. Children drew pictures of human and alien hands shaking. News reports showed scientists from Lagos and engineers from Seoul sharing data with visiting envoys from 3 different species. The first joint research station was already being planned near Luna, built with human steel and Chlorvian biogel, powered by Varn solar cells and Earth fusion cores. Paul Dawson returned to Viridia Prime, not as a petitioner, but as an invited guest. He wore the same gray suit, but this time the chamber was quiet when he entered. Xanthari rose to meet him. We were wrong, they said, and the words carried across the room like a bell. Not about your past, but about your future. The vote for Earth's full membership happened a week later. It was not unanimous at first. A few older delegates still clung to fear. But then the Varn representative stood and spoke of the flare, how it reminded them of their own coming-of-age ritual, where young ones light a single flame to show they are ready to join the community. Humanity did not burn us, they said. They lit a candle in the dark and asked us to see them. That is not weakness, that is courage. The final tally was 198 in favor, 2 abstentions, and 0 against. The 2 who abstained later sent private messages to Earth, asking for student exchange programs. The first official act of Earth as a full conquered member was not to claim territory or demand resources. It was to open the archives of Project Ember, not as a secret, but as a gift. Lena's resonance shielding, Owen's stellar ignition, even the stealth navigation codes, they were all shared freely with only one condition. They must never be used to harm the defenseless. The Conquered agreed. For the first time, a human idea became galactic law. Months passed. The Horizon returned to Earth not as a warship but as a symbol. It was docked in Geneva Orbital, open to visitors of all species. Children from a dozen worlds touched its hull, wide-eyed while Daniel told them stories not of battles but of choices. The hardest thing, he'd say, is not flying fast or building bright. It's choosing kindness when you have the power to do otherwise. Lena moved to the new joint station near the moon, leading a team of human, Chlorvian, and Varn engineers. They worked on a new kind of shield, one that could protect entire cities from solar storms, not just ships from weapons. Owen began teaching stellar dynamics to alien students, using Earth's sun as a classroom. Stars don't care about borders, he'd tell them. Neither should we. Paul Dawson never sought higher office. He stayed in diplomacy, but his role changed. He no longer pleaded for a seat. He helped others find theirs. When a small amphibious species from the Andromeda fringe asked for guidance, on joining the Conquered, Paul met them with tea and patience. Start with what you've built, he said, not what you've broken. Years later, on a clear night over the Pacific, Daniel stood on a beach with his daughter, now a young woman studying xenolinguistics. Above them, the sky was full of lights, not just stars, but ships. Human vessels, Conquered cruisers, freighters from worlds no one on Earth had known a decade before. They moved in harmony, like birds in formation. Do they see us now? His daughter asked, echoing her childhood question. Daniel smiled. They always did. They just needed to look. And in that moment, under a sky alive with shared light, humanity was no longer the species that had been ridiculed. It was the one that had shown the galaxy how to rise. Not with fire, but with grace.